Climate change is probably the greatest long-term challenge facing the human race. These were the words Tony Blair, then the British Prime Minister, chose to open the UK's climate change program over 15 years ago. Indeed, his words are still echoing today when it has become even clearer that the climate crisis is the most pressing global issue of our times because of its unprecedented destructive effects on humanity. Scientists agree on this fact, and increasingly so do politicians, decision makers, and mainstream media. And this realization is slowly penetrating the general public too. For example, here in Israel. However, this concerning reality has not yet sufficiently translated into action, policy change, or everyday behavioral change. Efforts to address the climate crisis have so far focused primarily on international and national level policies and solutions, but scholars and activists have long argued that it's not enough, and the local and regional focus is required to create concrete alternatives and directions. You're probably all familiar with the slogan, think global, act local. But reaching the goal of thinking globally while acting locally is often easier said than done. Because people tend to ignore what they don't see or experience in person. And even when people do experience extreme weather conditions, such as floods or wildfires, they are not necessarily linking these disasters to human activity and its impact on the planet. We call this gap between the global crisis and the local response required scale mismatch.
This is not about the science of climate. It's about people and policy. We are both policy researchers, and we study people, organizations, and political systems responsible for taking steps for addressing a crisis. My focus on public policy and Itay's expertise in civil society converge as we are both concerned with advancing environmental and climate research. And that's how we have formed multiple collaborations, including this one. So what needs to be done to address the crisis? We first must convince the general public and policymakers of the urgency of the crisis, and then create opportunities for people to change their behavior. And these two steps can only happen at the local level for two main reasons. First, localities are affected differently by climate change. People in these localities have different concerns, different identities, and different understanding of what a sustainable lifestyle is. For example, a coastal community like Netanya or Miami Beach in Florida is more concerned with sea level rise, while desert communities like kibbutzim in the Arava are more concerned with water supply. Second, because response to climate change is geographically dependent. For example, in cities, car usage can be significantly reduced by using buses and trains, a solution which is less relevant in rural communities. Still, the question is how to translate a crisis at the global scale into direct, visible, locally tailored, and clearly understood plans. Therefore, we seek to identify effective mechanisms to translate a global climate crisis to the local level.
Based on our prior research, we chose to focus on one such mechanism in our current research, NGOs and civil society actors. We do so for three main reasons. First, NGOs serve as a channel of communication between state and citizens, possibly mediating the sometimes thorny relationship between governments and the public. Second, in policy implementation, when we know both where we want to go and how to get there, we can implement it administratively. But when we know where we want to be, but not how to get there, then experimentation is needed. NGOs are well suited to experiment and take risks, skills which governments are less good at because they lack flexibility and tend to respond slowly to new needs. And third, NGOs can mobilize participation and civic engagement, recruit volunteers, access local knowledge, and offer closer connection to the general public. We suggest that the transition from global problems to regional and local ones, what we labeled scale mismatch, can be achieved through public participation and NGO-led deliberative processes. Therefore, we ask two main questions. First, How do national level climate NGOs act to translate the global climate crisis to the local level? And second, to what extent do deliberative and participatory methods contribute to the translation process? We study these questions by looking at two initiatives currently underway in Israel. These initiatives are unique because they are led by a coalition of more than 80 Israeli environmental NGOs with the goal of introducing the climate crisis locally and listening to the local voices in national climate decision-making. One initiative is a series of 14 regional climate summits that are taking place throughout Israel this year. These summits spread from the Galilee up north down to the city of Eilat in the far south, are conducted in collaboration with local and regional municipalities and are meant to consult the public on challenges emanating from the climate crisis. The second is a citizen assembly on climate change, an initiative planned to take place in the coming months where one municipality will be chosen to hold an assembly with the participation of 80 to 150 of its residents. This mini public representative group will undergo a guided process of designing a shared policy vision for a local climate plan. The model of citizen assemblies is a groundbreaking model of deliberative democracy currently being experimented in different parts of the world, including the United Kingdom, Ireland, and France.
Even at the current early stage of our work on this topic, we can already see some very interesting insights related to the Regional Climate Summit. Although the initiative was centrally organized, these regional summits were locally tailored and highly varied. We see variation in modes of participation, stakeholders involved, and topics discussed, among other factors. One example is diverse modes of participation. Some summits are featuring workshops and family-oriented happenings, while others have organized roundtables, lectures, and by academic experts, declaration signing, tours, and use of social media and digital platforms to increase public participation. Another example is the variety of stakeholders involved. Each summit was led and organized by different composition of national and local NGOs, local municipalities, partners, and social organizations that were willing to join the process. In some cases, it was local partners who actually led the process. This implies that there is no one pattern for cross-sector collaboration, and it is highly dependent on the local organizational and cultural ecosystems. To conclude, looking at the still emerging climate summits and citizen assembly offer us a unique opportunity to study real-life experimental setting where NGOs and local stakeholders collaborate. The regional diversity that appears to take place in this initiative will help us identify key factors and perhaps new leadership responsible for translating a global challenge into a local response, and examining the inclusiveness and participatory nature of these efforts and its success reaching out the public. This perhaps could assist in answering the tough question: how should governments and people in Israel and elsewhere deal with the global climate crisis?